welcome to the Actual Tech Media EcoCast. My name is Jess, and I am excited to be here with you all today. But before we jump into our content, I have some basic information that I want to cover with you. All right, let's kick off our day here today by taking a quick tour of your audience console. And we're going to start with the questions window. So if you haven't already said hi, there is a whole audience of cool humans out there, so reach out and give a wave to the other members of the Actual Tech Media community. Now, keep in mind that if you do have any technical issues today, a browser refresh is going to fix just about anything. But if those tech gremlins are clinging on today, no problem. Just throw a comment in the question section and our crew will be there to help. We also want this to be an informative webinar for you, so throughout today's EcoCast, we hope you'll get engaged and ask all your burning questions. Not only will we have team members responding to you over a live chat, we will also have a dedicated Q&A session at the end of our presentations. Now, if we don't get to your question during the live webinar today, don't worry, because the awesome experts that we have here with us will be following up after we wrap. All right, next up, there's going to be lots of cool aha moments on the EcoCast today. And if you want to share those with your community, we've made it nice and easy for you. You can use the Twitter button right there on your audience console, and the hashtag for today's EcoCast will be automatically added to your post. All right, our last stop on this guided tour, be sure to check out the handouts tab for some awesome resources and takeaways from our speakers here today. We have an info pack collection, solution briefs, white papers, data sheets, free trials, ebooks, upcoming webinars, and more. So many great resources, so be sure to go explore. Now, if that wasn't enough fun, we also have some exciting prizes that we'll be giving away throughout today's EcoCast. I'm going to tell you a bit more about those later on, but a few quick reminders for you all. First, you do need to be here live in attendance at the EcoCast in order to qualify to win a prize, and we will follow up with all of you after we wrap. Now, all winners must submit an IRS Form W-9 to Actual Tech Media, and all winners must meet the Actual Tech Media prize terms and conditions. Now, if you don't know what those full T's and C's are, that's fine. We've got the full thing for you. Just head on over to that handouts tab, click in, scroll down to the bottom, and you'll find them waiting for you there. Now, the absolute most important thing to remember is that we love getting all your insightful questions during these live webinars. In fact, we love it so much that we actually have a special additional prize for all you inquisitive folks out there. So in today's EcoCast, we will be giving away a prize for the best question asked in each of our live sessions. Now, the expert speakers and teams will review all questions asked after we wrap the webinar, which means that even if your question does not get read out in a live session, there is still a chance to win. If you are a lucky winner here today and you would like to donate the value of your prize, we have several wonderful organizations that we partner with. So let us know when we follow up about your big win, and we'll get that rolling for you. Again, we are so happy to have you all here with us live at the EcoCast today, and we want to keep that good feeling going, so let's connect on social media. Reach out and connect with Actual Tech Media on Twitter and on LinkedIn. We have lots of great content, and we always want to hear from you. Now, if you're looking for more awesome content and resources right after we wrap the EcoCast today, be sure to subscribe to the Actual Tech Media channel on YouTube. Another fun way to win a prize and, hey, grow this awesome community is to refer an industry friend or a coworker to the Actual Tech Media webinar series. Now, you'll find a link to do that right in your handouts tab, and you will also be automatically redirected at the end of the webinar. And both you and your coworker or friend could win a prize, and we hold those drawings every month. So be sure to refer a friend because, hey, it could quite literally be a win-win situation. Next, we have a cool opportunity for all the decision makers out there to get connected with new and emerging tech and innovative vendors. Here's how it works. All you need to do is click on the link in your handouts tab, fill out a quick application, and the Actual Tech crew will then match you with some vendors that we think you should probably be chatting with based on your needs. There will also be fun opportunities that you get to choose to join in, like surveys, test runs, new solutions, extended demos, and so on. You'll get some chances to win extra prizes, you'll chat with great people, and you'll learn about the hottest new trends in tech. So be sure to apply, or hey, send that link to a decision maker on your team. Now, I want to take a quick minute here to remind you all about one of my favorite resources, and that is ransomware.org. You can find out everything you need to know about ransomware, how to prepare, prevent, and recover. This site is jam-packed with information, helpful tips, checklists, strategic approaches, case studies, everything you need in one place. So wherever you are in your ransomware preparedness journey, there is something for you at ransomware.org. Go check it out and start exploring. All right, I have one more exciting resource I have to tell you about today, and that is the Gorilla Guide Book Club. It's going to give you access to free enterprise IT books authored by top industry experts, so you can stay up to date on trending enterprise technology. And yes, these books will work on your Kindle, your mobile device, and as I said, they are completely free. You can download these awesome resources at gorilla.guide, and there's a link for you in that handouts tab as well. All right, well, we have covered a lot of important things already, and I don't know about you all, but I am excited to dive in. So let's get going.
All right, well, thanks, Jess, and hello, everybody. Welcome to the Actual Tech Media EcoCast. Today's very timely topic is API security, detecting, monitoring, and securing application programming interfaces. I want to start by saying a big thank you for joining us on the EcoCast today. We've got some of the most innovative leading companies in the industry. You're going to be hearing from experts at Palo Alto, Rubrik, and Sequence. It's a lot of different sessions full of innovative solutions, hot trends, and creative strategies all in one place. So my name is Scott Becker. I'm with Actual Tech Media, and I'm excited to be one of your moderators for this incredible EcoCast today. You heard from Jess already, and Keith Ward is also on hand to help out in chat. Now, as always, it's not just awesome content we're giving away today. We have fantastic prizes too. So today we'll be giving away 3 Amazon gift cards worth $300 each. We'll give one of those away after each of the sessions today. Now, and as a reminder, you must be in attendance during the live event to qualify for the prizes, and all winners must meet the Actual Tech Media prize terms and conditions. And if you're not sure what those are, you can find the full T's and C's in the Handouts tab. Again, just click into that handout section of your audience console and scroll down to the bottom. You'll find it there. In today's EcoCast, we'll also be giving away a $50 Amazon gift card to the best question asked in each of our live sessions. So the teams will review all the questions asked. This is something we'll do after the event, which means even if your question does not get read out in a live session, there's still a chance to win. All right, so we've covered a lot of really important things already. Coming up right now is an overview of the security issues around APIs. And to provide that overview, we're lucky to be joined by Joey D'Antoni. Joey's a principal consultant with Denny Cherry and Associates, and someone who's been thinking about and dealing professionally with API security for quite a while. So Joey, we're geared up and ready to get rolling on this EcoCast. So let's get moving. The mic is all yours.
Welcome to API Security, detecting, monitoring, and securing application programmatic interfaces. I'm Joey D'Antoni with Actual Tech Media. APIs have become pervasive in our world. If you've read anything about Reddit the last couple of weeks or heard anything about Twitter in the last year, you know that APIs drive a lot of the modern applications that we use. They benefit developers by simplifying the coding process and letting them develop around a standard, namely RESTful APIs. And they grant them a wealth of access to data and other resources they might not be able to otherwise access. They also help providers who can help create new revenue streams by making valuable data and services accessible to those developers. And finally, APIs benefit customers who appreciate and drive demand for feature-rich apps that have interactive capabilities that all are driven by those APIs. The downside of having publicly available APIs, though, on the other hand, is that they are a security risk. They pose a great deal of risk to providers. They let outsiders have access to your data, and remember, behind every API, there's an endpoint. And this is a server and a series of databases that respond to those API requests. Vulnerabilities exist in any system, but since APIs are more publicly accessible and have more of your surface area exposed, they give hackers and threat actors a target for which to start poking away at to try to get access. Just like an internet-facing web server, the more free and open access the public has to a resource, the more they're going to try to poke at it. So it's important to use access control everywhere. But APIs are a little bit different than just our traditional web server. And how are they different? A server is used more as a proxy for data. The data rendering happens on the client and not the server. Your clients are consuming raw data as opposed to what you filtered through your web page, so they get to see more stuff, which means those APIs do typically expose the underlying implementation of your application and your application stack. Another kind of important thing is, instead of maintaining the user's state on the web server or a cache server on the web, that user state and their authentication token is maintained on the client side, so on their machine. Also, you're sending parameters like object IDs and filters in each HTTP request. So there's a lot of surface area there. So we're going to have a brief overview of API security and how you can better secure your apps. I'm Joey D'Antoni. I'm Principal Consultant at Denny Associates Consulting. I'm a Microsoft Data Platform MVP and a VMware vExpert. And I've got over 20 years in the data and cloud and security space, and I do all sorts of things with data and security. So this is a topic near and dear to my heart. APIs face a number of attacks. All sorts of threat actors, threat actor groups, individual hackers, nation states. And we define an API attack as just an abusive or manipulative attempt of usage of an API. This can be used to breach data or manipulate a commerce solution. And as APIs have grown and they're more popular than ever, we see more malicious traffic. According to Gartner, in 2022, API abuse moved from something that was infrequent to being the most frequent attack vector. And this can result in data breaches for enterprise web apps. It's really important to understand these threats and have a clear idea. So let's walk through a few of the different types of API attacks. The first, and probably one of the earliest attacks that we've ever seen, not just on APIs, but on the web, is a distributed denial of service attack. And this is where you have a number of bots or individual actors, but typically it's bots that just try to overwhelm the API gateway with a request. The goal of this attack is to make the endpoint unreachable or to potentially derail it, exposing other security vectors. Next, we have one of the more popular ones, SQL injection attacks. And almost, if you look at the heart of any data breach, it's almost always SQL injection. And if you don't know what SQL is, it's the language that is most commonly used to communicate with relational databases. And what can happen if SQL in an application is not coded correctly, a threat actor can pass a malformed string and potentially elevate their privileges, get data they don't have access to, all sorts of nastiness, destroy data. And modern development frameworks do protect against SQL injection, but not all apps are built on modern frameworks. Also, we have excessive data exposure, and this is typically when your developers just don't protect the data in the way that they should. APIs have sensitive data like credit cards, health information, session tokens. If you're not filtering your response before it reaches the client, that's something that's a risk. Token theft. Remember, we said the authentication is held on the client side. So there's a lot of malware that will try to exploit token theft or even just commodity credential theft malware that have been adopted by threat actors. And the reason why tokens are so valuable is if I steal your username and password, in a lot of cases, you may still have to use multi-factor authentication to get that. So just having your password doesn't necessarily help me. But if I can get a token that you had, I am now you, and I don't have to re-multi-factor authentication. And these attacks are hard to look for unless you're really monitoring them carefully. So it's important to kind of understand this, and we'll talk about some steps that you can take to mitigate this risk. API security is so very important because we want to avoid those data breaches. According to Forrester, the amount of API traffic that was malicious grew 85% between December 2020 and June 2021. So it's really important to take some of these steps. The first recommendation I always make is to put your API behind a gateway. This centralizes traffic features like protecting against denial of service attacks. Some gateways have SQL injection protection too, which is excellent. And they apply them to every request that hits your API. They may rate limit, block malicious clients, and they may even do some business-related functions like provide you metrics. You want to use a centralized authentication provider, and you want to have authentication. A lot of APIs don't have authentication at all. You want to use scopes and claims to limit the access and use fine-grained access control. So if a token gets stolen, the person who stole the token has very limited access. You want to avoid granting broad access. And then finally, and this may seem like common sense, but protect all of your APIs. Frequently what can happen is APIs are built for internal use only, and then they later get published. And when they're published, that tends to be when the security gaps come in, because even though you may have done an analysis of the app, it's a lot harder to build security into an application after you've built the app as opposed to building it in from the ground up. Finally, you want to monitor your applications. API security monitoring is more focused on detecting threats within the traffic that's coming into the API. So it's usually applied to those production APIs, and as those responses flow. It's typically less proactive in terms of preventing attacks and more reactive by stopping traffic that's coming in. It should also provide a level of logging so that you understand what's going on. Many times what these tools will do will allow API traffic to be intercepted and prevented from going to an upstream API or returning a specific response to that malicious call. Monitoring is not the end-all be-all. It's not going to solve all of your problems, but you should use it in conjunction with good security practices. Remember, like a cake, good security is defense in depth, so it's going to have a lot of layers. Taking advantage of these layers can help you build a more secure application. I hope you have a wonderful rest of the day. You have a lot of great speakers to learn from, and you'll learn more on the topic of securing APIs.
Okay, and we've got a poll up here for everybody just about what's your time frame for adding new or existing IT solutions at your company. And the options there are less than 6 months, 6 months to a year, 1 to 2 years, and not sure. So we'll just leave that poll up there for everybody for a minute. And I just want to thank Joey for a great overview there that really framed up the issues very nicely. In one stat that Joey provided there, that API traffic that was malicious has increased by 85% over, and I forget the time period, but it was pretty recent. But that really just underscores how timely this topic is. It's if you haven't focused a lot on AP security right now, it looks like the bad actors out there are focused on it. So it's a good thing to turn your attention to. Okay, well, we've got a lot of responses in on the poll so far. Appreciate it, everybody. Just as a general FYI, it looks like our biggest group of people who are looking to add things are sort of in that 6 to 12 month time frame, but the other periods are coming along as well. So. Okay. Well, thanks everybody. We're going to close this poll down in a 5 count. So 5 to just put your answer in there. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. All right, we're going to close it. Thanks to everybody who responded to that poll. So let's get rolling with our sessions, and it's time for our first presentation in the API Security EcoCast. And this session comes from Palo Alto, and I'm delighted to be joined by Mohit Basin and Jeff Sindel. And Mohit is Senior Product Marketing Manager, and Jeff is Principal Web Application and API Security Architect, both from Palo Alto. Gentlemen, welcome.
My name is Mohit. I lead product marketing for cloud workload protection and our web app and API security on Prisma Cloud here at Palo Alto Networks. And I have a background in building web apps and as well as computer and electrical engineering. And I have my trusted colleague, Jeff, here as well. Jeff, do you want to do a quick intro?
Hi, my name is Jeff Sindel, and Principal WAS Architect at Palo Alto Networks. And my background, too, is API and app development. And I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, and we're going to talk to you about detecting, monitoring, and securing APIs with Prisma Cloud. So before we get started and talk about how Prisma Cloud can help you secure your APIs, let's talk about why APIs are a top target. And I like to say that APIs have been around for quite a while, I think over the past 20 to 25 years, but they are now a top target because the majority of web traffic today is API calls. And the fact is that attackers are seeing this, are now leveraging APIs and abusing APIs, especially the ones that don't have authentication or are misconfigured, to access customer data. A clear example is, I'm sure you've seen some of the large telecom providers like T-Mobile or Optus get breached because of insecure APIs. And like I said, APIs have been out there for quite a while, but they're now a major focus for not only attackers, but as well as organizations. Jeff, anything you want to add here?
I just want to double down on the fact that APIs are interesting because they are exposed by the nature that they're intended to carry a lot of data, and that telecom providers especially want to provide access to their services for developers. And so there's a lot of information that's being exchanged, and if you don't monitor and keep an eye on your APIs, you're likely to end up in the news.
Yeah, and we're going to try to help you guys and partner with you to, stopping you from entering up on the news. So unmanaged and unsecured APIs are easy targets for attacks, and there's a few reasons why. We've heard of unknown or shadow APIs. It's the fact that your development teams are building or modifying applications. There was a recent study done by ESG that said that APIs are, or developers are changing APIs on a daily basis, and about 60 to 70% of organizations are, finding out that their developers are making daily changes to their APIs. And the truth is that while your development team is making these changes, security teams don't have that visibility into APIs, and they don't have visibility into shadow or rogue APIs. On top of this, because APIs are constantly being updated and changed, security teams cannot evaluate the risk of APIs. They don't have a way to profile risks due to whether it's a misconfiguration in the spec, whether it's just a logic flaw within the API, whether it's a vulnerability that is being exposed to the internet because of the API. They don't understand how to prioritize risk or just even how to profile the risk of an API. And then on top of that, we're finding out that, API gateways are great, but customers don't really have complete protection when it comes to securing APIs against real-time attacks as well as malicious attacks. They're unable to stop or block attacks, and they have limited protection. And then one thing I want to add is, because of all of these things, customers are now confused of saying, hey, where do I start API security? And I want to toss that over to you, Jeff. Where do you think is the right place to start off when evaluating your APIs?
Sure. So a couple of things to note is that the larger the organization is, the larger the problem, the larger the protect surface that's exposed by APIs. And very few customers that I talk to have an overall strategy, an enterprise level strategy. So they're blind. So the first place to start is with visibility and discovery. You need to understand what that protect surface is, what APIs are out there, and what the nature of the information that they have. Almost as a rule, every customer that I've talked to that's used Prisma Cloud has discovered that they have APIs that contain confidential data or sensitive data that they weren't aware existed. And so first and foremost is the discoverability and visibility. The next one is crucially important, is that you need to be able to decide where you're going to actually have real-time protections, because discovering that you have sensitive data exposed isn't enough. And the other thing to keep in mind is that even if you have great development hygiene, that there's constantly, your development teams are constantly updating the builds and making sure that they're not using insecure libraries, those vulnerabilities are detected over time. So if you don't have the proper visibility, your one-time security check that passed green is likely to have vulnerabilities that have gone undiscovered.
Yep, that's a great point. Yeah, getting that understanding of what you have and then understanding what risk is posed is very important. And how Prisma Cloud can help you in securing your APIs is by I would like to, categorize them in three categories. The first question we like to answer, like you said, Jeff, is, customers always ask us, what APIs do we have? And what we offer is API discovery, helping you auto discover all APIs in your environment and eliminating blind spots caused by shadow or rogue APIs. And like you said, oftentimes customers don't know all the APIs that they're using until we come in and scan them and say, here's a list of all of them. And then the next question, organizations ask us is, how do I know which ones to prioritize first or which APIs to focus? Because if I have 1,000 or 2,000 APIs, I can't go through all of them. I need to focus on which ones, are accessing sensitive data, which ones have logic flaws, which ones are exposing vulnerabilities. I need to focus on those ones first. And what we help customers do, we help profile the risk of APIs, helping you prioritize which APIs pose the greatest risk depending on your application needs. And then on top of that, once you have that visibility and understanding of risk, you can actually then move to real-time protection, where you can enforce protections for attacks on the OWASP top 10s for API, as well as rate limit some of the API access and prevent against malicious bot attacks. And with Prisma Cloud, this fits for any cloud native architecture. So it's an added level of security beyond your API gateway for your cloud native applications and APIs. And Jeff, do you want to talk more about the anatomy of an API-based attack, or should I cover it first?
I just wanted to briefly say that one of the key points that you made there was the fact that it's very important to mitigate, to qualify your risks. So you need to understand where your riskiest API endpoints are, and that a lot of the other protection solutions or that are security solutions for APIs, they're just looking at traffic. They don't have the visibility into the underlying workload. So the level of understanding of vulnerability is limited, and the ability to do real-time protections is also not present. You can't do it. You're looking at a copy of the traffic. So let's look at the API-based attack. So we talked about the importance of an API gateway. This is becoming more and more of an industry standard, and the best practices are to concentrate and aggregate your APIs under the API gateway. And this is good and bad for a variety of reasons. API gateways are often queryable for information about all the APIs that they serve. And we want people the good actors to use our APIs. They're key to the business. It's the way the data is exchanged. But the more we provide documentation and the more we make it easy to create a client, the easier it is for attackers. So many times attackers will use a variety of tools, and they'll discover, maybe in this example, it's a deprecated API endpoint. So it's something that the business wants to retire but can't for a variety of reasons. Maybe there's clients that are still slow and are not able to upgrade. Attackers can find these endpoints and then realize very quickly that no authentication is required. And again, that's a key point too. With many breaches have been caused by a simple lack of required authentication or some assumption that obfuscation of the information is enough. But attackers can use a variety of tools and techniques to actually attempt to access the API endpoints in these cases. And then an API is just in the base sense sort of a conduit for information. And so any parameter, query, attribute in the body of the post, these are all avenues for traditional, maybe more traditional API attacks like SQL injection. And Joey mentioned SQL injection is a very common vulnerability. So in this case, the attacker has used attack tools to find a SQL vulnerability. And once they found it and can exploit it, they can get inside and create a reverse shell or other process to exfiltrate information or execute malicious files.
And here's where Prisma Cloud comes in. And one analogy that I like to use is the Swiss cheese analogy. We all know that security is done in layers, different layers for different types of threats. And the reason why you need different layers is so you can protect against different types of threats. And how I like you guys to visualize this is like layers of Swiss cheese. The American style Swiss cheese with the giant holes in between. the idea of layering different levels of security is like layering different levels of Swiss cheese. You're hoping that the holes don't align in the Swiss cheese so that one layer of Swiss cheese can block attacks from moving forward, and multiple layers offer you defense in depth. And the cool thing with Prisma Cloud is that, it is a cloud-native application protection platform, a CNAPP, but it does also offer web app and API security on top of all the other types of protections. And to the anatomy of attack, what we can do is we can flag a deprecated API by, with our discovery capabilities, so that, the attacker cannot leverage an API that is out of date. And we can also check the API for like a misconfiguration such as no authentication required, and flag that to you as we profile risk, so that you as an organization understands that, hey, this API does not require any authentication to access the backend database or containerized application. And then on top of that, we have actual enforcements within the product to alert, block, and ban against attacks in the OWASP top 10, such as preventing SQL injection for not only your APIs, but for your web apps as well. And then on top of that, we can also enforce API paths so that you're not tampering with the path or using paths that are not allowed. And then lastly, that extra layer of Swiss cheese is that, we are a CNAPP and we do provide cloud workload protection. So we can also protect your workloads from executing malicious files or being used in crypto mining attacks as well. Jeff, anything else you want to add about Prisma Cloud, or what, organizations really value from us?
I mean, I would emphasize the defense in depth. I think it's key. Yeah. It's key to make sure that you have both the runtime protection as well as protection of your APIs and the visibility. You mentioned the Swiss cheese, and one of the examples that I'd like to give is, again, even if you have a development team that's got great hygiene, they're doing the best, they're following all the security standards, a zero-day vulnerability is completely unanticipated. It's one that no defense exists against because no one had realized that this was a vulnerability. So these types of things it's very, very important to have protections at the different layers in order to catch and stop a 0-day that your developers haven't anticipated.
Yep, that's why it's called 0-day, because you can't really anticipate it. Exactly.
I mean, I'd throw in the fact that we've got virtual patching in Prisma Cloud WAS, which allows Unit 42, our threat response experts, to work with the WAS team. And they have a curated feed of custom rules designed specifically for critical vulnerabilities when they're discovered in the wild. And our track record for response is really excellent. People may remember, and probably are tired of hearing about, the Log4Shell vulnerability, that we were able to publish a virtual patch for that in less than 24 hours. And that's pretty amazing, because it means that we had 100% protection against that threat, which was an attacker could basically do anything they wanted. 100% protection for that without even needing to worry about your development teams updating Java libraries or even knowing exactly where you had the deployment. So this is an excellent, excellent feature of Prisma Cloud.
Yeah, and this is on top of our runtime protection, so protecting against anomalous behavior as well. So that different layers of protection is very key. Or stacking those layers with Swiss cheese, like I talk about.
And I'd also talk about API gateways have become, the de facto standard for concentration. Most API gateways can produce a spec, and Prisma Cloud WAS can consume that spec and enforce it, which is another layer of protection that we provide. You really don't want your API gateway being in the business of security. There's already enough business responsibilities and technical responsibilities concentrated in the gateway. So it's excellent that we work together with the API gateway definitions to provide another layer of security for APIs.
Yeah, so here's like the analogy that I like to use, like the iceberg analogy, where the majority of API security point solutions, they only address the tip of the iceberg, where they look at the application front end, they look at north-south APIs, and some go beyond, where they look at east-west APIs. But they miss the rest of the application. And in my humble opinion, I think that APIs are just like the roads and highways of the application. The rest of the application depends on the workload, how the cloud infrastructure is set up, as well as how you're using infrastructure as code to actually spin up your resources. And your traditional solutions completely miss that. Whereas, Prisma Cloud, like I said earlier, is a cloud native application protection platform where we look at the web app front end. We look at the north-south APIs. We also look at the east-west APIs from microservice to microservice, because a lot of the API calls are internal. And then we also have capabilities to protect the workload, as well as look at the security posture of your entire application in the cloud. And we offer a lot of flexibility on how you want to deploy the solution, as well as we take a prevention-first approach to what Jeff said. Is we're looking to add different layers for different types of protections, especially for those zero-day threats or those zero-day vulnerabilities. And all of this is integrated into a holistic solution for you guys to consume. Let me end with this slide. So Prisma Cloud does put API and application security. We have over 167 customers, and we monitor over 600,000 endpoints every day. And we have had we've alerted or tracked or blocked on over 160 million policy violations within the past 7 days. So it is a robust enough platform to scale really well, and customers do like that as well. But Jeff, anything else to add on Prisma Cloud, or what some of the key differentiators are?
I think I'd double down on it's critically important to have observability. You cannot protect what you cannot see. It's a security tenant. And then the next piece is that once you find those areas, you need to understand which is where your actual risk lies. And then real-time protection is critically important for the business critical applications, because what we find oftentimes is that if there's a delay between the detection of an attack, attackers have had a lot of time to build their kill chains. They really only have to be right once, and they can exfiltrate data very, very, very quickly. And so a lot of times what we see is without the adequate protections, customers are in a containment mode and trying to understand. Prisma Cloud aims to make sure that you're in charge of your security and your data, and that you're protected against threats in real time, not just days later.
Yeah, exactly. And I think, one thing we want to leave you on is just questions to ask about API security or API security tooling when you do get a chance. I don't know if you've heard the analogy of don't stand too close to the elephant, because then you'll only see one thing. Where, if you stand too close, you might think it's a wall. You might think the tail is a rope. It's a sphere. So what we want to do is arm you with the right questions when considering API security solutions. Things such as, like Jeff says, how do I have that visibility? How do I profile risk? How do I enforce real-time protection? How do I know all the APIs? How do I secure the entire application? These are just some of the questions to keep in mind when evaluating API security solutions, and always ask them, what can you do for a zero-day vulnerability or a zero-day threat? Things such as that. Jeff, anything else you want to empower our users to ask?
I was just thinking about this analogy, and I'd say that, with Prisma Cloud, you're actually able to see the entire elephant, which is critically important, because we have a view of the underlying workload and its vulnerabilities. It provides the context, which actually makes sure that you're looking at the right things and putting protections in the right places. So ask the questions, make sure that you understand what your API security solution is actually doing and whether it sees the whole elephant.
Exactly. Yeah, so if there's one thing we can leave you with is evaluate a solution that's holistic, that gives you complete visibility and protection for APIs and the application. All right, with that, I think we have a couple of polls. Is that right, Scott?
Yep. Yeah, that's right. And so there's a quick poll up here for everybody just about additional information that you'd like about the Palo Alto Network solution. You guys said, ask the questions about API security. You've gotten some from the audience. So are you guys ready for some questions?
Yeah, we're ready.
All right, super. The first one here comes from Elena, and she's asking if we have an API gateway, are we resilient to API attacks? How does API security complement an API gateway?
I'll take that question. This is Jeff. API gateways, again, as I mentioned, they concentrate a lot of responsibilities, and an API gateway can provide you with some of the protections that you need. Oftentimes, they can do your authorization and authentication, or defer to a service to do that. They can do some rate limiting, but at the core, they're not security solutions. And so that's the part where API gateways tend to require some extension. It's important that your security solution be moving maybe even more quickly than the API gateway, so it's updated with threats. And so I guess API gateway is part of the solution, but if you want API protections, you're going to have to expand the view, expand your tooling. And I'll double down on the point solutions. What we find is a lot of, and Forrester has found too, that a lot of companies are using maybe 10 to 12 different tools to get all of the pictures. That can get really confusing, especially when you're across cloud, which is why it's important to pick a solution that has consistent policy across clouds, across deployment types, and works well with your API gateway.
Okay, great. Thank you. Next, we have a couple of questions here. One from Michael, one from Elena, just about how whether your product can scan for existing API endpoints, and I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about first how attackers scan to find these endpoints, and then how you guys do it.
So there's a number of ways that attackers use. They'll use tooling like subdomain lookups. So they're looking for all of the machines that are exposed, machine or endpoints that are exposed. You'd be surprised what is actually out there. Sometimes organizations, development teams move faster, much faster than the security machinery. So once they find that, they will use a variety of techniques. Sometimes they're heuristic scanners, so they're looking for common patterns. Other times you can go to sites like Shodan or other places on the dark web and actually purchase an API attack package. So attackers come prepared, and they are often using a combination of known endpoints, your own documentation against you, and other probes. Prisma Cloud alternately is actually looking at the workloads themselves and the API traffic via the API discovery, as well as the specifications that are produced by your development team. So we have a multiple contexts that get integrated into the API discovery, but we're actually looking at the traffic that's going on at the workload level. So we're not guessing at what the endpoints are or trying to follow some heuristics like some of the externalized scanners are. We're actually looking at all of the active endpoints in all of your environments.
Okay, excellent.
Just to add to Jeff's point, you get that real time, that visibility is like real time. So not only are you monitoring real time, you're getting that real time risk profiling, and then that enables you to then enforce some sort of protection. Because visibility is like a great first step, but ideally you want to reach to some sort of level of protection to actually block or stop attacks in real time.
Okay, great. Hey, we've got a question here from Latoya, who's wondering how often you should check your API security. What's sort of the ideal way to profile API risks to determine what to prioritize first?
I think the answer is how often it is. Unfortunately, the answer is all the time. You need to be constantly aware. So it's a good practice to have regular security reviews and audits, but because attackers aren't following some sort of cadence or schedule, a threat could pop up that's unanticipated at any time. So there's another piece where it's important to have real-time protection, real-time enforcement of your spec. It means that you're not firefighting. You're actually looking at what are active risks and not just trying to figure out whether some attacker probe represents a real response. So
yeah, and Jeff, you said earlier, the attacker only has to be right once, where the security team has to be right all the time. So yeah, like you said, it's the important answer. It's all the time. You should be evaluating it, but hopefully you guys can build some sort of process or tooling in place to help do that.
I mean, that's where Prisma Cloud it can be really helpful, right? Because we are actually updating threat profiles. We have wildfire intelligence stream to detect and alert about new threats in the wild. The virtual patching, all of these things make it possible for the system itself to be both proactive and reactive. So shifting left, moving security left so that you're actually defining a spec with your development team is providing, enforcing that spec, while at the same time keeping abreast of any of the developments of novel threats out in the wild. All of those pieces make it possible for you to have a good, robust, protective solution that doesn't make every day sort of a firefight, but also make sure that you are up to date with your security posture at all times.
Well, gentlemen, this has been fascinating. Really great discussion here. But unfortunately, we're running out of time. If somebody wants to get started, with Prisma Cloud, what do you recommend?
I would say sign up for a free trial or read one of our best practices guide and see if you can get like a free trial or a demo to see it in action in your own environment to then help you understand risk. Jeff, anything else? Or reach out to Jeff.
I think the best thing is to try it, see it demoed for yourself. We've got a lot of ways that can happen, and it's really eye-opening how quickly you can get a perspective of your API protect surface with Prisma Cloud in just a few minutes.
Okay, well, Mohit and Jeff, thank you so much. Really appreciate you coming on today and giving us an update.
Thanks for having us, Scott. Appreciate everyone's time.
All right. That was fantastic. And, in addition to the ways to get started that they both mentioned there, also don't forget about that handout section. We've got in the Palo Alto Networks PDF there. It's 5 best practices for securing modern web applications and APIs. Nice short, like 11-pager with just some really good best practices. Great read there. So I highly recommend that one. Okay, well, it is time for our first prize drawing of the day. And the winner of our first $300 Amazon gift card is Peter Crisano from Massachusetts. So congratulations to Peter Crisano. We'll be in touch about claiming your prize. And now it's time for our next presentation in this API Security EcoCast. And this session comes from Rubrik. And presenting for Rubrik are Mike Preston and Jake Robinson. Mike is a technical marketing architect, and Jake is an application solutions architect. So I'm going to turn things over to Mike and Jake.
My name is Jake Robinson, and welcome to Automate and Secure Everything with Rubrik APIs. Now, Mike and I could probably sit here and nerd out over APIs for a couple hours, but today we really wanted to show you some great examples of how our customers are using APIs. Mike, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself and talk about our agenda.
Thanks, Jake. First, a little bit about myself. I'm Mike Preston. I'm part of the technical marketing team here at Rubrik. I've been here for roughly 4 years now, and prior to that sat in the customer space, so I completely understand the challenges that our customers face as it pertains to building out automation within their environments. So, what are we going to show you today? Well, over the next 30 minutes or so, you'll gain an understanding of the Rubrik API landscape and the ecosystem it supports. We'll go over our API-first approach and talk about all of the integrations and advantages that come with it. Then we'll get into the exciting part, the demos. We have a number of exciting and interesting use cases to show off just how powerful the Rubrik APIs are, from reporting on your infrastructure to a self-healing data center, and how to automate the creation of an isolated environment to facilitate functionalities such as backup validation. We have a demo to show you. Finally, we'll leave you with a number of tips and tricks on how you can get started consuming and leveraging the power of Rubrik APIs yourself. So we're here today because Rubrik made a decision on day 0, before a product was even available, to provide an API-first architecture. Each and every feature we release has a hard requirement that an API must be available to perform that process. This is why you see complete API coverage across all of our products and services. from on-premises deployments of Rubrik CDM, along with coverage for our SaaS-based services like ransomware investigation and sensitive data discovery. So by ensuring every function, every click, every single process that you perform within the Rubrik UI simply calls an underlying API endpoint, this basically makes us customer zero of our own APIs. But, and this is the key point, it's not just our UI that consumes these APIs. All of our endpoints are 100% open and publicly available to consume with your tool of choice. If you want to use PowerShell to manage your Rubrik cluster, go ahead. Want to integrate data protection into your Terraform plans? No problem. Need to make a mass change to SLA domains assignments with Ansible? The possibilities are really endless. But since we can't go over endless possibilities in 30 minutes, let's go over the main ways our customers actually leverage our Rubrik APIs. Jake, do you want to walk us through a couple?
First is our integration with IT automation suites. Through integration with ServiceNow, you can automatically create incidents based on failed backups, give power to your users to perform tasks like creating their own on-demand snapshots or live mounting a database, and even report on SLA membership using your CMDB. Integration with other IT automation suites such as Morpheus or vRealize Automation will also give you a self-service capability for data protection tasks, improving your operational efficiency and lowering time to recovery. Integration with configuration management tools such as Ansible allows us to simplify large deployments through bootstrapping an entire Rubrik cluster and even keeping standard configurations for our SLAs, hosts, and installing Rubrik backup service. You can also operationalize common ad hoc tasks using playbooks to do common tasks such as on-demand snapshots and live mounts of VMs or databases.
So thirdly here, we have centralized monitoring and reporting. Being able to pull out information from your Rubrik cluster into existing monitoring tools such as Splunk can be invaluable when it comes to troubleshooting. Or being able to generate documentation that covers off all of the configurations within your Rubrik cluster can be really beneficial in the event of a misconfiguration. Fourthly, we have automating IT processes and operations at scale. This is probably the most well-known use case for automation. Being able to automate and orchestrate the deployment, management, and configuration of hundreds or thousands of applications and objects across data center and cloud not only saves you valuable time, but frees up organizational resources to focus on more revenue-generating activities and drastically reduces the risk of error. And fifth, we have building new services on top of Rubrik. Some of our customers have built their own management consoles for certain processes that they need to perform within Rubrik, or have built integrations into pre-existing custom portals they may have had. And our SDKs make this really easy to achieve without having to know the ins and outs of Rubrik APIs. And for the most part, we've done a bunch of the heavy lifting for you. These are just a handful of the pre-built integrations we have, but there are many, many more available. We have our SDKs supporting languages such as PowerShell, Python, and Go. So if you're an expert in a specific language and just want to hit the ground running, go ahead, download an SDK, and you're on your way. But maybe you're not comfortable with a programming language like Python, but you live inside Ansible every day. This is where our integrations can help you. We provide plugins and modules integrating with those new and hot automation tool sets like Ansible and Terraform. And we also have support for various orchestration platforms like CloudBolt, CloudFormation, and Azure ARM templates if that's where you spend most of your time. And on top of all this, we also provide a number of use cases complete with documentation and quick start guides that give you step-by-step instructions to solve specific problems. For instance, we have our Roxy use case, which walks you through how to set up a chatbot using AWS's Lex and Lambda services, which will allow you to grab information directly from your Rubrik cluster within IM programs like Slack or Microsoft Teams. The main thing to remember is you don't have to be an expert in order to leverage Rubrik APIs. You don't have to be a programmer. We have many integrations that allow you to use your tool of choice. So with that, let's jump into the fun part and start showing off some of the demos. We'll start with the as-built report. So what is the as-built report? Essentially, it's a configuration document framework which uses PowerShell to produce as-built documentation. It does this across multiple different vendors and outputs into multiple different formats. So a little bit about some of the features that it has. Number one, you can generate your report output in multiple different formats like Microsoft Word or HTML or text. You can apply your own custom formatting so you can style it to your company's colors and fonts and styles. You could tailor the report basically by different detail levels of sections. So within Rubrik, we'll see that you can have more detailed information on your SLA domains, but maybe less detailed information on the cluster settings itself. There's other things such as health checks, which highlight different configuration issues, and you can go ahead and attach and send these reports via email as well. So in order to generate these reports, it's pretty simple. There's 4 steps here. You open a PowerShell console, install the vendor modules, install the as-built report module, and run the new as-built report commandlet. Pretty simple. So with that, let's actually take a look at the as-built report demo in action.
All right, so let's start off and take a quick look at those 2 config files that we talked about earlier. First, we have the global configuration. This contains information that will apply globally to all of your reports that you generate, regardless of the vendor or module that you're using. So here we enter things like our company name, email information, author information, and different global configurations that we want to apply across all the reports. Next, we have our Rubrik-specific report configuration. Here we specify configurations that control whether or not we show the logos, table of contents, captions, and different formatting options. This is also where we control the level of detail that we want to output within the report. And we can control this for each section of the report. So here you can see I can change the cluster level of detail to 5. I can actually turn off the SLA domain detail so it won't report on it at all. And we can do the same for our protected objects and snapshot retentions as well. So to actually generate the report, it's one commandlet. Here we have the new as-built report commandlet, and we pass it the report type, which is Rubrik. We specify portrait for the orientation, and we also provide the FQDN to our Rubrik cluster along with credentials to log in. This is also where we control things like the output format, the output folder for the report, and of course, input the 2 configuration files that we just went through. So it's that simple, one commandlet. And as we kick this off, we can see it's going through and grabbing a bunch of information around our cluster settings, our backup sources, our SLA domains, etc. Through some video magic here, we've generated the report, and it looks like it took less than a minute to generate our level 1 detailed report. So let's go have a look at it. If we look at our table of contents here, we can see there are a number of configurations that it's documented for us. Taking a look at cluster settings, we can see it gathered a total of 4 items. So some very basic information, as this is just the first level of detail. The same holds true if we scroll down and take a look at SLA domains. We could basically see we've gathered the SLA name, its base frequency, and an object count of how many objects it's assigned to it, as well as some very basic archival and replication settings. So let's compare that to the most detailed level of report. Again, we'll start here at our cluster settings, and now we can see we're gathering quite a bit more information around our cluster. If we head back to the SLA domain section as we did before, we could see we have a lot more information now. Each SLA domain is broken out into its own subsection. So not only do we have the generic information around the SLA domain name and object count, but we get more details on the actual frequencies of when we're taking backups. We also go into a lot more detail on the protected objects, splitting it out into object type, as well as listing out the exact names of the workloads and applications that are assigned to that SLA domain. So that's essentially it. There really isn't a whole lot to demo. Basically, you import the modules, set up a couple of configuration files, and run one commandlet. This makes it very easy to schedule and ensure that you always have that up-to-date build documentation for your Rubrik cluster.
All right, so I hope you see some of the benefits of the as-built report, but if not, let me round some up for you. Number one, it makes documentation not suck as much. Nobody likes to produce documentation, and with the as-built report, we can completely automate some of this stuff so you always have the most up-to-date build documentation on hand. So now I'm going to pass it off to Jake, who has another exciting demo to show us.
Thanks, Mike. Imagine with me that overnight you've been hacked. Ransomware has been installed on a few of your most critical systems. It's possible that some of us in this room or even watching don't even have to imagine. No one wants to come in first thing in the morning to a virtual machine console like this. And because of that, we worked on a concept in our lab that we call the self-healing data center. During the night, your virtual machine snapshots are indexed by Rubrik, and Rubrik's ransomware investigation has begun to look for that suspicious activity. Here you can see that we have an event with high confidence levels and high encryption. These are bad news, especially in the middle of the night when I don't have my eyes glued to the event screen. Thankfully, I have a simple Python script running in the background that's just polling for these specific types of events. My Python script is connected to the Rubrik Data Protection API and has seen this high confidence, high encryption event and has automatically taken action to do an in-place recovery of the virtual machines that were affected. Can you imagine the look on this ransomware group's face? An operations and a security team at your organization may put something together that is a little more robust than a simple Python script, but the goal is the same. Mitigate ransomware as quickly as possible, minimizing downtime and revenue loss. A more robust solution might look like this. A Rubrik event is sent in real time to our SIM, or Security Information and Event Management System. The SIM sees that high confidence, high encryption event, and then it tells our SOAR, or Security Orchestration, Automation, and Response. So the SOAR will then kick off a workflow to do the quarantine, the recovery, and any other tasks that you have slated for ransomware recovery. Rubrik's API-first architecture allows us to integrate well with systems like Splunk and Palo Alto XSOAR to make the self-healing data center a reality. If you haven't gone through a ransomware exercise before, the CISA has a great ransomware prevention and response document. Rubrik Data Protection alone allows you to automate much of the response tasks. With a simple Python script, we're able to, first of all, identify and isolate the impacted systems through Rubrik's ransomware investigation. We then also have a complete snapshot of all of the affected systems on our immutable storage. We also acted on the most critical systems first by determining the impact and the confidence level. And finally, we were able to restore our critical systems from immutable storage on our Rubrik cluster. Mike, why don't you take us through that sandbox demo you've been working on?
Thanks, Jake. That self-healing demo is pretty cool. Let me walk you through now something I call the Rubrik Sandbox. So what is the Rubrik Sandbox? Essentially, it's a backup validation framework that we've built that runs tests against live-mounted VMs within an isolated environment. Now, these tests are fully customizable. We have some that are available by default. However, you can create and report on your own tests if you wish. That isolated environment that's created can also be, left running, so you can go ahead and get access into that isolated environment through a masqueraded subnet. So you can leave the sandbox up and running if you want to do any manual testing afterwards. So let's talk a little bit about how the sandbox works. So we have a pretty, generic environment here, a pretty common environment. We have a management network within vSphere, as well as a VM network. And then we have a client that's actually running the sandbox script. So the first thing that happens is the script will go out and create a new vSwitch with an isolated port group on a specified host within your vSphere environment. From there, a router gets deployed and configured. Now, the router is configured in such a way that it'll pull an IP from your management network, and then it'll also attach a NIC to that isolated environment that's created. Now, that NIC is actually going to have the same IP as your production gateway, so that way those VMs will be able to communicate and talk to each other. Finally, the VMs are live mounted into that isolated environment. A route gets created on the client, so that's how we gain access into that masqueraded subnet that allows access into the isolated network. Now this subnet is something you specify, so make sure you aren't using that subnet anywhere else in your environment, or you may get some undesirable networking results. Next, tests get performed. By default, we go ahead and we test for ping and VMware tools, but you can also test for service checks like Windows services running, or port checks, whether you want to maybe confirm that port 80 is open or closed. And then finally, a report gets generated, and then the live mounts are removed. And as I said, you can actually set a configuration file to actually leave that lab up and running if you want to do some manual configurations after the fact. So with that, let's jump into the actual demo.
We'll start by looking at the configuration files we need in order to make it run. First, we have our router configuration file. This basically defines information such as what the router's IP will be, its name, password, any API keys that we need, and where we want to deploy it within our VMware environment. We also specify within the configuration what our isolated network should look like. So what the router's interface address within that isolated network should be set to, which should mimic your production gateway, as well as whether or not we want to enable DHCP within the isolated network. We also have to specify our masquerade subnet. So this is how we will gain access into the isolated network from outside of the router. Do keep in mind you'll want to make sure that you aren't using this subnet anywhere else within your environment, or you may get some undesirable networking issues happening around you. Next, we have our application configuration. This is where we're going to specify some specific configurations around the report that gets generated, like where it should output to, whether or not we want to leave the sandbox or the live mounts running after the tests are performed. We then define what applications we want to test. So we can see here I have my mpreston WinVM that I'm going to live mount, and I also specify a set of local credentials to log into that live mounted VM. Then we specify the tests. So by default, every VM process will be checked for a ping response and for the VMware tools status. However, I can specify other tests as well. As we can see, this one's looking for whether or not port 80 is open or closed, along with checking that a couple of Windows services are running. And of course, we can add as many virtual machines as we want. So I have another here which I'm testing, but I'm only running one additional test on it. We then have our credential configuration. This is pretty simple. We provide credentials into VMware, we need to provide credentials into Rubrik, and then define as many guest credentials as we want. Now these credentials are all stored locally to the client and encrypted. So as far as tests go, we can see them all defined within our tests folder here. We have 4 variations of tests built, but you can essentially define and run your own tests as well by simply placing them into this folder and changing the application config. Basically, if you can write a test in PowerShell to look for whatever and generate a success or a failure, you can place your custom test in here and have the sandbox automate it for you. All right, so let's actually fire up this instance. Basically, we just run the validate.ps1 script and pass it those 3 configuration files, and that's all we need to do. The script will then execute and carry out everything for us. We can see here it's going through and validating all of the configurations that we have, and then making the configurations within VMware to support the isolated networks if needed. So it's already moved past that section and is now live mounting our VMs for us. So while that's happening, let's go and take a peek at the VMware setup. I'll head to the host that I specified here. And if we look at the networking, we can see that we've created a new standard switch called Rubrik Sandbox. And inside that, we have an isolated port group. Within that, we can see our router attached, as well as our 2 VMs that we specified. Again, there's no physical adapters attached to this switch, so there's no way for our VMs to actually get to the outside world. If we take a look at one of the live mounts, we can see here that our IP address is the exact same as it is in production. So there's no re-IPing or addressing that is necessary in order to perform this. The VM acts just as if it was restored back into production. So if we head back into VS Code, we can see our scripts completed. So let's go ahead and take a look at the report that's generated. So we get a nice HTML-based report outlining a little bit about the configuration that was defined, and we can also see the individual VMs which were validated and whether or not they passed the various tests that were executed. So we can see we've ran a bunch of tests, and these were all executed from the client that was running the script. Now this client actually accesses these virtual machines through that masquerade subnet. So what happens is we actually create a route to the isolated network running through the masqueraded subnet that we set up in the router config. So we can see the route here. Essentially, any traffic destined to that masquerade subnet will be directed to the router's management IP. From there, the router performs the various translations and allows access through. So we configured this sandbox to stay running after it was done the test. So let's go ahead and ping our masquerade IP for our Windows server. We can see we're getting a reply back. Same goes if we want to ping our SQL VM, which actually gets DHCP from the router. It's also responding. But we can do more than just ping. For instance, let's RDP into this Windows VM through that masquerade subnet. We can actually get directly on that live mounted VM and see exactly what it sees in terms of networking. So we've already RDP'd to the masquerade address, so let's list out our networking here. We can see it still believes it's in its production network. It still has its same IP. If we send a ping to our gateway, this actually works as the router's mimicking that production gateway for us. We can ping the other virtual machine on its production network address, and it's responding as well. So within the isolated networks, VMs are able to communicate with each other just as they were on the production network. That said, if we're trying to ping the outside world, as you can see, we can't get out. This allows us to say, live mount a 3-tier application within the isolated network and have all of the servers communicating no problem, but ensuring that they'll never get out to the outside world. So we can be sure if we live mount things like Active Directory domain controllers, they won't reach out to their other domain controllers and try and replicate. So that's essentially the sandbox demo. We did 2 VMs here, but as you can imagine, you can automate this, set this up to go out and run regularly and test your backups and maybe leave sandboxes running and set up routes for different people to get inside and perform different tests or different manual validations that they want to do afterwards as well.
All right, so let's talk a little bit about some of the benefits of what we just saw. As I mentioned, it was originally designed for backup validation, and it does that really, really well. But due to the isolated environment and that masqueraded subnet and the access allowing you to get into that isolated environment, you can think of many, many additional use cases. Imagine testing things like 3-tier application upgrades, performing, root cause analysis, maybe digging deeper into ransomware or malware investigation, or things like penetration testing. Basically, all things you don't want to do against your production environment. However, you can easily live mount VMs into the isolated environment and perform these tasks against them.
Working with Rubrik's APIs is incredibly easy. First of all, the documentation for our APIs is built right into the cluster. That means you don't have to Google search around for the specific version and specific API that you're looking for. It's built right in with the latest and greatest documentation. Next, we have a Swagger interface that we call the Playground, which allows you to go and try out any API calls available. Finally, we put our money where our mouth is when it comes to API-first architecture. The Rubrik Code Capture Chrome extension allows you to see in real time the API calls that are being made from the GUI to your Rubrik cluster. This means operationally, you can go and see an API call that you can do in the GUI and then just copy that over to your code. Finally, no good API-first architecture is complete without a great community behind it. Build.rubrik.com is your gateway to get connected with our Rubrik Slack instance to talk to us and other community members. Also on build.rubrik.com, you can get access to our software development kits and code examples and videos. Finally, talk to your account executive or your sales engineer to schedule a meeting with Mike or I to talk about specific automation use cases that you have. Mike, any final words from you?
Sure thing, Jake. I'll just reiterate, reach out. We're here to help. I'm always interested in hearing how our customers are leveraging Rubrik APIs to build unique use cases in their environments. Thanks so much for watching.
All right, and we do have a poll question for you. We appreciate your feedback on additional resources that you'd like to see from Rubrik. Looks like we had a lot of questions that we can't get to right here for time, but Mike Preston and Jake Robinson and the Rubrik team will do their best to respond to all these questions. I'd also like to remind you of all of you about the handouts. Rubrik has provided a PDF on Rubrik for cloud native protection. So be sure to check that out if you'd like a quick 2-pager on automating backup and rapid recovery at scale across your hybrid and multi-cloud environments. So Mike and Jake, great presentation today. Thank you so much for the update on Rubrik's API integrations and for all the nice demos there. So now it's time for our next prize drawing. And the winner of our next $300 Amazon gift card is Matthew McHenry from Georgia. So congratulations to Matthew McHenry. We'll be in touch about claiming your prize. And thanks to everybody who's responded to the poll here. We do appreciate your feedback. So it's the last call for this poll. I'll just leave it up here for another moment, and then we'll move on to our next presentation. Okay, I see a couple more coming in. I'll give it a 3 count. 3, 2, 1, and we'll go ahead and close that down. Thanks to everybody who responded to that one. So now it's time for our final presentation in the API Security EcoCast. And this session comes from Sequence Security. And presenting for Sequence is Muzaffar Pasha, who's Senior Product Marketing Manager. So welcome. Thanks for being here. Take it away.
Scott. Today, we want to give you a quick overview of the Sequence Unified API Protection Solution and our unique end-to-end approach to address the issues around your API protection lifecycle. Today, there are too many APIs that are hiding in the shadows, undiscovered, unknown, and even the known ones are often unprotected against risks. We'll share how we can help you know the unknown and protect the unprotected, keeping you ahead of data breaches, fraud, theft, and business disruption, while maximize the business value of your APIs. So APIs are everywhere, and the numbers simply back it up. Sequence's research has revealed that out of 21.1 billion app requests made over a 6-month period, 70% of the app requests came from API transactions. That's over 14.4 billion requests. Another fact is that nearly 90% of developers use a third-party API to construct their software, meaning when you use an Uber app and you're trying to locate where your driver's at, that's actually an API calling out to Google Maps to find out their location. Or when you call or text your driver on why he's late, that's actually a Twilio API used to connect via Uber to your driver. It's just easier to call out another API today than to write a whole software function from scratch. Now, 50% of all business-to-business payments are actually done today via APIs. And we expect that in the future, that percentage is going to rise dramatically from where it is right now at 50% to a much higher number. And all these proof points really just illustrate that APIs are everywhere and that the trend line in usage is just pointing upwards towards into the future. So unfortunately, attackers have also taken notice, and they're adjusting their cyber attack campaigns to now target APIs. Some sample research from Sequence, the recently published Sequence Threat Report, 53% of organizations that reported, they reported being impacted by 3 or more API attacks per month. Second, 80% of the block attacks were actually directed at the API application itself. And then finally, of the reported respondents in that the Sequence Threat Report, 63 million records were breached annually, and attackers were exclusively focusing on exploiting an API, and which subsequently allowed the exfiltration of sensitive data. All said, we expect that by 2025, there will be a 2-fold increase in all API-related data breaches, putting more pressure on organizations to protect their data, but also increasing their inability to comply with government regulations. So in our experience, as we talk to security leaders around the world, it really distills down to 3 fundamental questions they all ask themselves. First, how many APIs do I have in my organization? That includes both managed and unmanaged APIs. Managed being APIs that are under the oversight of the security team, and unmanaged APIs are basically APIs that are brought up by an R&D group, for example, and never notifying security team of their existence. Second, they asked themselves, what is my risk exposure from APIs? What are the vulnerabilities that can be exploited that can lead to data loss, fraud, or business disruption? And then finally, third, am I actually under attack right now from a cyber criminal organization? And these are the three fundamental questions that are constantly being asked by security leaders around the world. The problem today is that security teams don't have the visibility nor defense capability to protect their organization's APIs. It all starts with visibility of your API attack surface. You can't defend what you don't know what you have. On average, there are over 100 times more APIs that are undiscovered and unknown than there are known APIs. Worse, even the known APIs are poorly protected. Instead, organizations rely on their existing infrastructure devices in order to protect their APIs. The problem is that these devices, such as a WAF, API gateway, simply do not have the context to understand when an API is actually being attacked. And that's the root of the problem. A WAF, for instance, detects threats via signatures, and API gateways use basic access lists or rate limiting capabilities to block attacks, but neither of those two devices that I just mentioned can fully detect when an API is actually under attack in real time. So let's look at the big picture over a period of last 20, 30 years, and let's look at the API protection maturity model. And this model really describes all the security solutions that are being used to protect today mission-critical APIs. Now, WAFs started off about 25 years ago, and WAFs were really created to protect web applications that were often based on monolithic software architectures. Now, their main focus was basically detecting only known vulnerabilities. And what they would do is they would analyze the traffic flow to the web application, and then traffic flow to the web application, and then start matching threats via a signature database. Now, this type of solution doesn't really scale today because API applications are spread out. They're not monolithic. And so WAFs don't have the context. The next step in this evolution is really bot detection and mitigation, which many customers started using alongside WAFs years and years ago, and they were exclusively focused on web applications. And now many of the solutions have pivoted to API applications, but because cyber attackers are constantly figuring out ways to thwart detection, a lot of these companies are now using SDKs or JavaScripts to send telemetry to kind of identify whether the end user is actually a human or an actual bot. The main problem with these type of solutions is that it can take months and months to tune properly to reduce false positives. Now, the next stage is API gateways. Now, API gateways are an integral part of deploying and managing APIs, but they're really focused on software developers. And most of them offer some quote unquote security capabilities, such as geo-blocking, rate limiting, and creating really limited access lists that can block very basic API attacks, but they have no context on large, sophisticated, or unknown attacks. Then about 2016, about 6 years ago, a new category emerged called API security. And that was really focused on placing a sensor in the traffic flows, sampling the traffic, and then using machine learning to understand how users interact with an API application. For example, a banking app that often has maybe at a minimum 4 APIs, a login API endpoint, a check balance and API endpoint, a transfer funds, and then you would log out of that session. Now, if suddenly an attacker suddenly did something anomalous, like escalate to another user ID, such as an Ebola attack, these tools, these API security tools, would then surface up the behavior as being potentially malicious. But the problem of a lot of these API security vendors is that it requires a lot of tuning before it starts really working within the customer environment. Now, if you change the application, then you have to retune it again. And worse, these solutions are really focused on detection and prevention, meaning prevention that was done via third-party out-of-band integration through a load balancer API gateway. And that prevention is not done in real time. Now, the latest iteration to API protection maturity model is really the unified API protection solution that provides full coverage over the API protection lifecycle, which we will talk about in the following slides. So when it comes to proper API protection, what's needed is a unified API protection solution, which is composed of 3 stages: discover, comply, and protect. Discover is really about API attack surface discovery, the ability to discover and classify both managed and unmanaged APIs, which allows you to manage your entire external API attack surface exposure. So when changes are made to your API, such as a new API being created or a domain being created, you're immediately notified in real time. Now, the next stage is comply, which is really the crux of API security posture management, and is the ability to understand for each API within your attack surface, what is the risk, and how does that actually kind of affect the overall risk posture of your organization. So you want to make sure that you're constantly, monitoring your security posture, understanding if you comply with an open API specification or security and governance best practices. And then most importantly, are you testing pre-production APIs to discover critical vulnerabilities? And then once you've actually laid out all the risks, start remediating from high to low, remediating the risks that matter the most. Now, the final stage is protect, which is really API threat protection. And it's the idea of detecting threats with very low false positive rates. And when you can detect accurately with low false positive rates, you can actually deploy the solution inline and block API attacks as they occur. If you have a solution that has a very high false positive rate, and then you start blocking line, what it does is starts blocking legitimate traffic and causing outages affecting user experiences. And so this is a very critical feature that customers are always looking for. So from Sequence Unified API Protection Solution, it can deploy Discover with API Spider, which allows you to discover your entire API attack surface. That includes both managed and unmanaged APIs with zero-touch discovery and real-time inventory. It can deliver Comply with API Sentinel, which provides API security testing for critical vulnerabilities and runtime compliance posture. And that also includes managing open API specifications and security governance best practices. And then it can deliver Protect with API Spartan that provides real-time threat detection and prevention that blocks automated attacks and prevents online fraud. Now, all 3 of these are actually supported by our world-class API managed services that provides assistance in configuration, management of all 3 products in support of your API protection needs. So Sequence Managed Services is the only dedicated API managed services in the industry. And now there are others, especially larger WAP providers that provide managed service support, but it's very broad-based. It includes support for cloud WAFs, load balancers, CDN, DDoS management, but their main focus is not API security. And Sequence is the only vendor on the market at the moment that has a dedicated team of API security experts that provide 24/7, 365 days, years global coverage. It's composed of API discover and risk monitoring, which is to help to ensure that you always have continuous API discovery of API attacks, detection of risks within those APIs, API threat protection, which is the continuous, making sure that you have continuous API protection, detection and protection, assistance in responding to automated attacks, and helping to make sure that you can properly configure your policy configurations to block malicious traffic versus legitimate traffic. And then finally, API edge protection, which provides assistance in configuration of OWASP top 10 web DDoS protection against layer 3 and 4 attacks, and management of domain-based certificates. So what are the business outcomes of a solid API protection solution for our customers? Well, first, it's about maintaining brand reputation, avoiding being the next company on the front page of the Wall Street Journal or CBC. Second, it's to prevent data theft. I mean, by fully complying, protecting your API applications that prevent cyber criminals from exploiting customer and business sensitive data. And third, it's stopping financial loss, where you can actually prevent fraud and breach mitigation costs, such as stealing inventory or company assets, or avoiding regulatory fines and the legal requirements in breach mitigation. So we have a number of great customer success stories where Sequence Unified API Protection solution has helped customers prevent cyber attacks. The first one is Poshmark, which saved over 8.4 million in savings due to a fraud prevention that was blocking a cyber campaign targeting Poshmark. And then in that process, it blocked about 2.4 million attacks in that cyber campaign. The second customer success story is Ulta Beauty, and they saved over $320,000 in savings in both infrastructure and data loss prevention. And in the process, they blocked over 204 enumeration attacks, meaning that Ulta Beauty has an online store, and the attackers were enumerating, looking for opportunities to authenticate into a particular user account, and then getting in, seeing if they could access via that same authenticated session into another customer account, and that would allow them to steal inventory. And then the final really success story is an unbranded Fortune 50 global telecom company that was able to block about $8.7 billion worth of losses from ATO attacks. And what that translated over in sort of the real world was blocking 3 billion malicious transactions in real time. And that was, and that's one of the reasons why you see a large number of Fortune 50 companies choose Sequence, because our ability to block large scale attacks at enterprise scale. So really 6 reasons why our customers choose Sequence. We're one of the few companies out there that actually has an API attack surface management tool that allows you to discover your publicly exposed APIs in a matter of minutes. Second, Fortune 50 customers. I mean, we're of the API security vendors in the market. We actually have the largest number of Fortune 50 customers, and the real reason, or the root reason for them choosing Sequence is the fact that we can deploy an enterprise scale, ability to block millions and millions of malicious transactions in real time, and we can provide this across SaaS deployments, on-premise, and hybrid. And then 3, API security managed services. We're the only one that has a dedicated API security managed services offering that provides automated protection services backed by the leading API security experts in the market. That's provided 24/7, 365 days per year. We offer rapid and flexible deployment that requires no agents, no JavaScript, no SDKs. Our protection is real-time, inline, and that's native. That doesn't require any integration in a third-party device such as a load balancer or API gateway. And then finally, we are the only solution today that provides a complete API security offering that provides protection across all three phases of the API protection lifecycle, which is discover, comply, and protect. A little bit about sequence security. Today, we protect about more than 2 billion user counts across all our customer deployments. We have the largest API threat database with that's numbers over 100 million. And if you were to add up all the equity that each of our customers has, it would add up to $9 trillion in value that we protect around the world. And then in terms of daily API transactions that we block, it's 6 billion transactions per day. And this number is one of the largest in the industry. And I don't see any of our competitors actually come anywhere near to the scale that we can approach. Now, when it comes to logos, we provide you know, a lot of marquee enterprise accounts across telecom, finance, luxury, retail, and media. So in order to get to learn more, to get that sequence advantage, you can get started in 15 minutes. You can start discovering public-facing APIs that requires no software deployments, no network changes, no configurations on your part. All you have to do is go to sequence.ai/assessment to get started. So now I'm just going to open up to questions and answers.
All right, perfect. Yeah, great presentation. Really fantastic API security story there, Zephyr. Really appreciate that. We do have some audience questions here. The first one, they're asking, we have a problem with visibility into our internal APIs. So does Sequence provide a mechanism to discover internal APIs?
Yeah, so API Spider is our API attack surface management tool. So it not only discovers at the external attack surface the both managed and unmanaged external APIs, but we actually have a mechanism to also discover internal APIs. And we do that by integrating into your cloud providers such as AWS, Azure, GCP. And we just, we use an OAuth token, integrate into your, VPC or a VNet environment, and then we can collect runtime traffic and then correlate and coalesce all the internal APIs that are actually being used. So we provide coverage for external, internal API coverage.
Okay.
So no agents or software at all, which is an important.
Okay, great. Yeah, and there's another question here from the audience, kind of related to the agent question. How much tuning do we need to do in order to get Sequence up and running? They mentioned that they spend a lot of time tuning their current API security solution.
So Sequence, what we do is we use CQAI, and you can say it's our threat detection engine. It has about 200 plus pre-built rules and machine learning models. And so out of the box, we can provide 90% efficacy with most customer environments, and reaching 99.9 efficacy in about a week as the machine learning models learn how the users interact and with your application. So I think that's pretty rare. I mean, in terms of an API security vendor, we provide that requires very minimal tuning in order to get basically up and running and protecting your APIs.
What was that percentage in a week? 99.9?
Yeah, 99.9. And that's on average from our customers. We can pretty much quickly deploy and, and the reason is because we have those pre-built rules.
Mm-hmm.
We have that foundation that CQI has a foundation of 4 pillars. The first one is, this is different from all the other API security vendors. It's built on infrastructure, meaning attackers use infrastructure to lay out their attack tools. That could be, on AWS, Azure, it could be anything on the internet. The second one is tools. We can identify these pre-built tools that attackers use to launch automated attacks. And so these toolkits are well known. They're the digital underground, and we compile a list, and we know how to identify them. The third one is really credentials, meaning often that attackers use the username and password of prior breach databases that have been exfiltrated, and they just use those names. And we collect the same information, and so we can figure out pretty much that if a stolen username and password is being used. And then the fourth pillar is behavior, and that we use sophisticated machine learning to understand human behavior versus machine behavior versus malicious behavior. So all four of those pillars help us to deliver 90% out of the box efficacy.
Wow, that's really impressive. Well, Muzaffar, I think that's a good place to leave it. Thank you so much for coming on and bringing us up to speed on Sequence. Really appreciate it.
Well, thank you. I appreciate it much.
And we have one last poll question for you. We appreciate feedback on additional resources that you'd like to see from Sequence. So it looks like we had a few more questions that we can't get to right here, but the Sequence team will do their best to respond to all these questions. And I'd also like to remind you about the handouts. We've got a PDF from Sequence. It's a great data sheet about Sequence Unified API protection, really digestible overview. So be sure to check that out if you'd like some more detail. And while I leave this poll up here for everybody, let's go to our final prize drawing of the day. So we have one $300 Amazon gift card left, and this one goes to Derek Hemsley from Arizona. So congratulations to Derek Hemsley. We'll be in touch about claiming your prize. And thanks to everybody who responded to the poll. We do appreciate your feedback. I'm going to go ahead and close that down as we wrap up here. So that nearly brings our API Security EcoCast to a close. On behalf of the Actual Tech Media team, I want to thank all of our presenters today for putting together such great presentations and demos and having all those great insights and Q&A today. I also want to thank all of our participants, Palo Alto, Rubrik, and Sequence for making this event possible. Now, if you were watching the event today and thinking this type of event would be the ideal platform to tell folks about your platform or solution, well, we'd love to hear from you to help you determine which of our hundreds of events each year would be a good fit for you. So contact us at connect@actualtechmedia.com. We do have another great event coming up tomorrow. It's a virtual summit on protecting your data, the intersection of data security, security awareness, and ransomware. It's going to be a good one. In fact, I think this is an incomplete list of all the companies that are participating, so that's not one to miss. And finally, thanks to all of you for attending today's EcoCast from Actual Tech Media and for all your great questions. That's going to conclude today's event, but have a great rest of the day, and we hope to see you either tomorrow or another time. Take care.